All right, so hello, we're recording. So I'm here with William Miller. Uh, this began because I read an article about shrimp welfare and the case for more specifically giving money to a place called the Shrimp Welfare Project. I think this is a very good use of your money. Uh, William wrote, left a comment on Substack explaining why he disagreed, and we had a brief back and forth and decided that it would just be better to have a debate about it. So I guess for those who don't know, do you want to say who you are?
Yeah, I'm Will. You can call me. Some people call me William, Billy, whatever. But I started a Substack nearly 3 months ago, and I've been writing on a range of topics. As political season heated up, I delved into that on an opinionated basis, but also from an analytical standpoint, looking at prediction markets and the like. And going forward, I'm just following my interests. So. I love Substack. I think it's a great platform, and I'm happy to have connected with a lot of people like yourself, Matthew. And to that end, I've noticed on Substack a sort of I wouldn't even call it a subculture. It's just more of a just an actual culture of lifting each other up and this movement of helping the shrimp. I mean, some of the major publications have jumped on board with your movement of alleviating shrimp from their pain. And admittedly, at first, I thought, is this are we serious here? The more I read into it and read your articles, your several articles, your initial one, and then several follow-ups. The more I sort of started to recognize your side of the argument, and so yeah, I'm really excited to talk about that today, and I have a few thoughts of my own. So
yeah. I mean, I join you in thinking Substack is a good place for interesting dialogue. So I guess I'll start out by before I lay out the case for shrimp welfare, I'll just describe what the Shrimp Welfare Project does. Mm-hmm. The aim is to alleviate shrimp suffering. The primary thing that they're currently doing with marginal dollars, that is to say, if you give them extra money, what they'll do with it, is they're engaged. So currently, the way most shrimp are killed is they're thrown on a big thing of ice where they slowly freeze and suffocate to death. Now, for about 100,000 or 10,000, I forget the exact number, dollars, they can provide a electric stunner, which stuns the shrimp before slaughter, so that rather than the shrimp slowly, agonizingly freezing and suffocating to death over the course of 20 minutes, instead the shrimp get what is most likely a painful death. So what the Shrimp Welfare Project is doing is they're offering to provide free stunners to companies so long as they use them to stun at least 120 million shrimp. And it turns out this is a very, very effective way of reducing the number of shrimp that are painfully killed. They've also worked for corporate reform. So they've got Tesco in the United Kingdom to make all the shrimp that they sell humanely slaughtered. So the shrimp, rather than slowly suffocating to death, instead they're electrically stunned before being killed. In total, despite operating on just a few $100,000, they've positively impacted the lives of about 2.6 billion shrimp per year, which means even if they shut down today, an extra 2.6 billion shrimp would keep being helped every year by the actions that they've carried out. Okay, so why is this a good place to give? Well, so it turns out that for every dollar you give to the Shrimp Welfare Project, on average, it prevents about 1,500 shrimp from painfully dying per year. So 1,500 per dollar per year. If we assume that this lasts for 10 years, which is a reasonable estimate for how long they'll use the stunners, this means that probably around 15,000 shrimp will be saved from a painful death per year. I know it sounds weird to think the way that you ought to spend your money is to give to the shrimp, but when trillions of them are painfully dying and you can prevent 15,000 of them from dying for literally $1, it doesn't seem so weird. Like 1,500, that means that for every penny you give the Shrimp Welfare Project, it prevents about 150 shrimp from painfully dying. And if 150 shrimp were about to be painfully frozen, suffocated to death, unless you spent a penny that you had in your pocket, I think spending that penny would be a good use of a penny. So I think similarly giving to the Shrimp Welfare Project is a good use of $1. Now, The final point is, you might say, why do we care about shrimp? They're very small. So the evidence is pretty good that shrimp feel pain. And the most detailed report that tried to quantify how much pain shrimp feel concluded that they feel pain on average 19% as intensely as we do. So if that's right, then $1 given to the Shrimp Welfare Project averts about as much agony as if you prevented around 3,000 humans from painfully freezing and suffocating to death. That's just the amount of pain prevented. So even if you think this is off by an order of magnitude, even if you think, if you think it's off by 2 orders of magnitude, $1 is still equivalent to preventing 30 painful human deaths. So as long as you think pain and suffering are a bad thing, the Shrimp Welfare Project is so effective at reducing pain and suffering. It prevents such a gargantuan amount of pain and suffering for such a small cost that I think it's a really, really good place to spend your money. Just for one estimate, I didn't raise that. I convinced some people to give about $14,000-ish to the Shrimp Welfare Project. This in total probably helped about 600 million shrimp. So like little old me writing about this, helped a population of shrimp avoid a very painful death, about twice the number of humans that live in the United States. So I think that's a testament to just how insanely effective the Shrimp Welfare Project is. So Will, why am I wrong?
A few questions on the 3,000 number, where you equate so is that based on the 19% pain that shrimp feels? So the 1/5 is, so 3,000 is 1/5 of 15,000. Is that your how?
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the points I brought up was that humans have a way more complex nervous system. Obviously, shrimp are prehistoric creatures with I think the estimate was about 1 million neurons, and you did have a rebuttal for that. So let's say that humans' nervous system is more than 15,000 times as impactful or robust. What do you say to that? And I want you to bring up your point on the human brain's ability to sort of dissociate from torture scenarios and things of that nature.
Yeah, sure.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so it's true that shrimp have very many fewer neurons in their brain. And so if you're going by neuron count, then you would say shrimp don't matter very much. They might even matter given how insanely effective the Shrimp Welfare Project is. Maybe it's still an okay way of spending money. Sure. Now, the problem is, there is no reason to think that the intensity of one's experiences correlates at all with neuron count, and plenty of reason to think that that's not true. Rethink Priorities had a lengthy and detailed report on this, where they tried to look at whether we have a reason to expect there to be some correlation between the number of neurons that you have and the degree of your sentience. This is not, if this were right, what we would expect is serious neuroscientists to propose that if you want to look at how intense an experience is, you'd look at the number of active neurons. This is not a hypothesis consistent with the neuroscientific data. And it's not a hypothesis seriously entertained by neuroscientists when they want to figure out the intensity of experiences. Often, in fact, there's an inverse correlation between the intensity of experiences and how many active neurons there are. So there are lots of cases where there being fewer neurons in an area, or an area being thinner, is what gives rise to more intense experiences.
I would assume from an evolutionary biology standpoint that speaks to the fact that shrimp, since they aren't able to manipulate their environment or organize, they're more focused on their limbic system. So that pain is a more robust signal to them to avoid danger. Am I thinking along the right lines there? Whereas human strategy and sort of higher level thinking is a deeply evolutionary concept, right? Am I right in thinking that?
Yeah. Well, so I was just addressing the claim that we should think shrimp are not very conscious because they don't have very many neurons. And my claim is that, there's no evidence that the number of neurons correlates with how intense a being's consciousness is, and plenty of contrary evidence. If you thought this was a good metric, then you should care a lot more about elephants than people, because elephants have considerably more neurons than people. And there are cases where people lose about half of their neurons. There was a guy who lost about half of his brain, about half of the neurons in his brain. There was another case where a guy maybe lost even up to 90% of his neurons. So it's a little bit unclear. Liquid ate away at parts of his brain, but part of it still existed and was compressed. It doesn't seem like he became substantially less conscious. So that's a reason to think neuron counts are not a good metric. Now, why think shrimp probably suffer relatively intensely? Well, first of all, this is the conclusion of the most detailed report that was ever done on the subject, that estimated on average they suffer 19% as intensely as we do. Now, maybe you would think more complicated brains lead to more suffering, and I think that's a reasonable bet. But there are also reasons why you might expect it to be the opposite. So if you just look at the way shrimp behave, for instance, they behave like they're in a lot of pain. If you cut them, they a lobster in a pot will really struggle to a great degree trying to escape, as if it's really in a lot of pain. It behaves the way we do when we're in a lot of pain.
Sure.
So there's based on how they behave and based on evolution.
From an evolutionary standpoint, that was required for them to adapt as a species, because they don't have the ability to strategize or organize and sort of look after one another. So I'm sure their senses, their pain senses are extremely attuned to their environment, because that is their only form of averting danger, right? Whereas we're able to take shelter, tribalize and look after one another, and communicate.
Yeah, this is a point that Richard Dawkins has made, where he notes that the evolutionary function of pain is that it serves to encourage an organism. It says, that's bad. Don't do that. You might get killed next time. That's the evolutionary function of it. But if that's right, then simpler creatures who are less good at learning might need more pain in order to teach them the right lessons. So all this is to say that I think we should not we should think there are decent odds that shrimp not only feel some pain, but that they feel fairly intense pain. And so then preventing tens of thousands of them from painfully dying is a good use of a dollar.
Okay. So I take your point on that, and I don't even really argue with it. I mean, you have, let's say the project itself is as effective as you say it is, and it alleviates pain of shrimp to the degree that you say it does, which I'm not arguing it doesn't. What do you say to someone, which I hold this view, that believes that psychological pain is more important than physical pain?
Yeah. So I would say it depends on the degree of physical pain and the degree of psychological pain. So here's an analogy. Imagine that there were 3,000 people who are about to die. And by spending $1, you can anesthetize them so that their deaths would all be painless. If you didn't anesthetize them, then their death would occur they'd be thrown in a suitcase. The suitcase would be zipped up so they don't have quite enough air, so that they're slowly suffocating. And then the suitcase would be thrown in the North Pole so that they suffocate and freeze to death. And you could you could make 3,000 of these people's death painless for just $1. Even though you might say, emotional struggling is usually more important and such and so on. Nonetheless, it would be reasonable to say, no, okay, actually, this is a really good use of $1. Now you might say, okay, that's because they're experiencing this emotional anguish, but I mean, we could imagine that it's humans that are severely mentally incapacitated, where they're not able to understand what's going on in a way similar to a shrimp.
So they're only able to feel the pain physically. They have no ability to conceptualize their demise.
Yeah.
So that brought me to your comment, which was okay, let's assume that there are, let's say infants, and I brought up circumcision. I'm I'm not against circumcision, because the baby will never remember it. It feels it at the time, but it doesn't have the lingering effects or long-term damage that trauma creates. And trauma can come in the form of physical pain, psychological pain, isolation, loneliness, all kinds of things, right? And so we sort of went down this rabbit hole of, okay, so you would be in favor of burning babies, and my response was, what about the long-term damage to their body? Even if even if I don't care about their pain, and you said, okay, there's no long-term damage to their body. So my response was, okay, well, what's the benefit of allocating resources toward burning babies whenever you could be allocating those scarce resources to something else?
Right. Well, so I guess the analogy could be, imagine there was a charity. So imagine right now there was this existing ritual where parents they would they would take terminal. This would be done to terminally ill babies as part of some sacrifice, where what they would do is they would basically throw them in a big thing of icy water so that they'd freeze and suffocate to death. And for $1, you could make it so that you unfortunately you can't prevent the babies from dying, but for $1 you can make it so that all 3,000 of these babies die a completely painless death. That they still die, but their death is totally painless. I would say that's a really good use of money. If you can prevent thousands of babies from having painful deaths rather than painless ones for $1, that's a good use of money. But it seems like your position, if your claim is like, no, actually just extreme agony, if it's experienced by creatures that don't really understand what's going on, isn't a big deal, would imply that that's not a good use of money.
Well, my point on that is that, no, I don't consider, I have no consideration for the pain or agony of a creature that effectively doesn't have sentience, or doesn't have the ability to, isn't going to be emotionally or psychologically harmed from the experience. Now, who will be emotionally or psychologically harmed is the parents, the onlookers, people who are aware of that situation. It's an extremely unsavory thought for a baby to be, mutilated or harmed in any way. And so what do you say to that? That's the only reason, that is the only reason why I would be against your scenario, not because of the physical agony of the babies.
Wait, sorry. You're saying that you don't think that it would be a good use of $1 to make it so that the 3,000 babies die a painless death rather than an excruciatingly painful one?
No, it wouldn't. If their death is inevitable, then and they don't have the cognitive faculties to internalize the meaning of their death, there's no psychological toll, then what good does it do in the greater scheme of things?
Well, so my view is that unpleasant experiences are bad, and really, really unpleasant experiences like drowning, freezing to death, or being burned with a hot iron are really bad. And so if you can prevent lots of those things at minimal cost, then that's good. I think your view, it's, you haven't supplied an argument in favor of it. And I think the view is wildly counterintuitive. Nearly everyone, I would expect, if you asked 1,000 people whether it's much worse for a baby to die painfully than for a baby to die painlessly, even if whether the baby dies painfully or painlessly doesn't affect whether other people are sad about it or have emotional, are made emotional about it. I think nearly everyone would say it's much worse for the baby to die painfully than painlessly.
But here we're talking about, is the dollar spent to avoid that more useful or effective than $1 spent elsewhere? Now, I argue that $1 spent towards poverty, right? So some charitable organization that alleviates people from poverty. Not only does that improve their health, it improves their cognitive abilities, their ability to help their community for the future. And so there's a downstream and a knock-on effect of alleviating someone of that psychological pain and suffering of being impoverished, and it has a lasting effect. Whereas if you're just trying to alleviate physical agony for something that is an inevitability, if they're already dying, then that's not as good of use of money.
Well, I think it depends on the amount of the thing, right? So if it was a choice of saving one baby's life or like making painless one otherwise painful death, I agree it would be better to save a life. But if it was a choice between preventing like 10 million babies from painfully dying versus versus saving the life of one baby, I would say making it so that the babies are given a painless death rather than a painful one is more valuable. For 10 million babies is more valuable than preventing, one very painful, than just preventing one death. And I think nearly everyone would have this intuition. I think if you ask nearly everyone, like if you could for $1 make 3,000 deaths of babies painless rather than excruciatingly painful. So every dollar would prevent every penny would prevent about 30 babies from painfully dying. I think nearly everyone would say, yeah, that's a really good use of money. And so if you're sort of granting the Shrimp Welfare Project is sort of like as good as that, it's just then I would say, I think in the minds of most people, they'll consider that to be convincing vindication of the Shrimp Welfare Project. If I'll settle for only being good as making painless the death of 3,000 babies per dollar.
Right, but you're not arguing, and I'm not arguing that it's bad. I'm arguing that it's sort of meaningless, and it doesn't do anything to help our species. So at a certain point, I guess this is a moral discussion, right? It's what value do you place on a human life versus simply not even a shrimp's life, a period during which they suffer when they're already inevitably going to die. And even more so sort of sidebar here, I'm wondering why you wouldn't devote resources towards a charity that is helping organisms, animals with more complex nervous systems. Is that simply because the Shrimp Project, like as you say, is extremely efficient and effective?
Yeah, I think right. I think it'll just come down to the degree of effectiveness, and the Shrimp Welfare Project just comes out to be much more effective, even if you think that shrimp aren't that important. It just prevents so many of them from dying a painful death that it comes out more effective than other stuff. Now you're saying, well, why help other species instead of our own? My view is that I don't think that species is morally relevant in itself. So, for example, suppose we looked at your DNA and it turned out you were a different species, right? So you had exactly the same cognitive capacities as other humans. You had you were the same in all the other morally relevant respects, but you were just genetically a different species. Maybe you were, the aliens placed you there or something. I don't think that would diminish your moral worth one bit, because I don't think that species itself is morally relevant. And of course, species correlates with lots of traits that are morally relevant. So if I could save a human or a shrimp, I'd obviously save the human. And I think that's because humans have many greater capacities than shrimp. They live longer. They seem to have a greater range of valuable experiences over the course of their life. But all that you need to think that the Shrimp Welfare Project is a good bet, you don't have to value shrimp anywhere near as much as you value humans. All you have to think is that preventing extreme amounts of extreme shrimp agony is a good thing. And it's hard to see why it wouldn't be.
I don't think that's true. I don't think you just have to think it's a good thing. I think you have to think that it is better than whatever your proportions are, that it's better than helping a human cause.
Yeah, right. So we'd have to compare it to some specific human cause. But if it's as effective, if it averts as much agony as preventing on average preventing 3,000 painful human deaths per dollar, I think something if something is that effective, then it's a pretty good use of money spending, unless you think that shrimp suffering is morally irrelevant. And I don't see a reason to think that. It's true that shrimp.
I do. I actually do. And humans evolved to care for one another. They developed emotions. They developed empathy. And so just as shrimp don't care about ants, why should we care about, if our evolutionary biology led us to be empathetic, emotional, and having the range of emotions and the ability to navigate strategically, then isn't it natural for us to prioritize our own human suffering?
But I don't think
at any cost.
I don't think that the fact that something is natural means that it's a good idea. So it seems like people's, it may be that people having a preference for their own race is also natural. But nonetheless, I would say if a person says, I'm a racist on account of evolution giving me a preference for my race over others, I think we would say, even though you do have that preference, that you ought not have that preference. That's unjustified, because skin color.
Yeah, no, you ought to have the preference towards humanity, your species, not your race.
Well, my claim is that the beings you ought to care about are sentient beings. You're pointing out that evolutionarily we do care about beings. We do primarily care about our species. But I'm saying you could make an exactly parallel argument for racism. You could say, look, we evolved to care more for our own race. And even if that turns out to be true, just as an empirical claim, there were some evolutionary pressures that favored caring more about one's race. That wouldn't matter to whether racism was justified. That would just tell us how we came to have the racist beliefs. It wouldn't tell us whether those racist beliefs were correct. Similarly, the fact that we evolved to care more about members of our species, that doesn't tell us whether we should care more about members of our species.
Well, should we?
So like an alien came down to Earth, and they were like, okay, we're going to kill you all because we evolved not to have empathy for creatures that look weird. They find us to look really weird, and they don't have empathy towards us. I think we would say, even though they evolved to do that, they're in the wrong. They're unjustified. Well, they oughtn't.
If they were able to follow through on that notion of, okay, we're going to kill them because they're not as complex as us, then they would try. And if we didn't have the necessary evolutionary defense mechanisms to resist that, then wouldn't that be evolutionarily natural itself?
But again, I'm saying that the fact that it's natural, just as it would be bad if the aliens tried to kill us, and we could imagine them doing it for a really trivial reason. Just the aliens think we look weird, so they try to kill us. I'd say just as that would be a wrong thing for the aliens to do. It's a wrong thing. The mere fact that we happen to have a preference for our own species over other species doesn't tell us whether it's justified to have that preference.
Well, is it justified in your? So this probably gets to philosophical and even religious beliefs, right? Like, to what degree do you value the well-being and the minimalization of suffering of other species, and why?
So
why does it matter?
So my view is that suffering matters for its own sake. That if we think about what makes it bad to be in extreme pain, like think about the most painful experience of your life, or think about times you've read about really extreme instances of suffering. If we think about what makes it bad, it seems like the thing that makes it bad is not like, when you're in really extreme pain, it's not what species you are. It's not like when you have a really bad headache, you're like, this sucks because I'm a Homo sapien. And it doesn't seem like it's because you're smart. If you became, if you got a lobotomy and then were tortured, that wouldn't make the torture less bad. It seems like what makes pain bad is that it hurts. It's that you're in this unpleasant state. That's what pain is. And so if pain is bad in virtue of the way of how it feels, and shrimp can also feel pain, then shrimp's pain is bad just as ours is.
I disagree with you there. I think that pain is bad in the lingering traumatic effects of it, and the psychological pain of it that lasts and renders you incapacitated for time to come. Which
I don't think that can be the only reason why pain is bad. So if you have a person on their deathbed, they're capable of experiencing pain, but they're about to die. If they experience a lot of pain, I think that that's a bad thing, right? So
Sure. All else equal, that's not a good thing.
well, so then it can't be that the only reason that pain is bad is that it causes long-standing emotional distress, because in this case, it won't cause long-standing emotional distress.
I'm saying that is what uniquely makes human suffering more important than shrimp suffering.
But my claim is it depends on the amount of each, right? So would you say that? So imagine there's a terminally ill baby. Would you say that the terminally ill baby's suffering isn't, it matters just like categorically less than other humans on account of it not leaving long-lasting emotional damage because the baby will die, of course.
To the baby itself, no, that doesn't matter. To the mother, the father, the aunts, the uncles, the people with long-lasting knowledge of the suffering of that baby and the trauma that they carry with them, which renders them incapacitated to be productive humans, that is what matters to me, not the suffering of the baby, which will not ever remember it. And if it's inevitably dying, then it doesn't, there's no opportunity cost there. There's no, it doesn't, that baby suffer, like the alleviation.
Wait, sorry, is your view that the baby's suffering doesn't matter at all, or that it doesn't matter very much?
I'm saying that it doesn't matter to the extent that nobody else is the wiser. If nobody knew the baby was suffering.
So sorry. Just to be clear, you're saying it doesn't matter at all if nobody else is the wiser?
If it's existing in a vacuum and the baby is suffering, yes, you should help it, only if there are zero other opportunities to, only to the extent that it takes resources to help that baby, and those resources are being diverted from something else productive in the world.
Okay. So let's imagine you discover, you personally, that there's this intergalactic torture machine. Okay, and this intergalactic torture machine, what it does is it creates babies, it tortures them in the most grotesque and heinous ways imaginable, and then it kills them. No one else has ever found out about it. No one else will ever find out about it. Suppose it doesn't cause you any psychological distress, and you can shut it down for 1 penny. Is it better to spend the 1 penny shutting down the baby torture factory, or is it better to spend it on, say, giving to a human charity?
Nobody will ever, it is a certainty that nobody will ever find out about it.
Yeah.
And nobody will ever become, well then, yeah, the penny's better spent elsewhere if that's existing in a vacuum.
Okay, but remember, it's torturing quadrillions of babies every second. You think the penny is better spent elsewhere?
It still doesn't matter. It doesn't, look, I value.
This is just like, okay, this is like
I value things that happen on Earth and that can move our species forward, and I think that's where resources should be diverted.
Okay, but like, yes. So your position,
but if it's an infinite number of babies, and you can throw an infinite number of pennies, they're diverting resources away from what's happening here and alleviating problems that surround us and that impact our societies, our tribes, our civilizations. If what's happening in a faraway galaxy has no impact on what's happening to our species, then it's not worth even considering.
Yeah, well, I was imagining it was happening to like human baby. The human babies, like it's creating babies that are qualitatively exactly like human babies. So it's like
and there's still babies that have no ability to process the pain psychologically or emotionally.
When you say purely, they feel the pain. They're conscious now. Okay, it's true that they won't remember it in the long term. But I mean,
but they're dying anyway. They're dying anyway. They have zero probability of living, a long and fulfilling life.
Yeah, I mean, I'll grant you that your position is consistent, but I think it's rather psychotic, and I think virtually no one would adopt it. I think virtually no one would hold the view that shutting down the baby torture factory would not be a good use of a penny.
Well, why would it be a good use of a penny?
It would be a good use of a penny because it prevents an extreme amount of agony at small cost.
Well, what is the value of agony in the first place?
Well,
It's
your
the
claim is
knock-on
that
effects of it. If it exists in isolation and there are no knock-on or downstream effects of agony, then that agony doesn't exist.
well,
It doesn't matter.
Well, the agony exists, and my claim. I mean, you're just sort of repeating yourself. You're saying it doesn't matter, right? I know that's your position. My position is that agony is bad because of how it feels, because it hurts. That if you think about if like you think about a really painful experience, like of a person being like really brutally tortured, and you think, why is that bad? My view, the reason it's bad, okay, part of it is because of long-lasting emotional trauma. But I think the main reason it's bad in most of these cases is just because it hurts. If you think about why, so for example, there was a case I was reading about where there was a person who, it's really horrible. There was some crime that was committed on a boat, and what the person did was they tied the other person to like a big metal anchor, and then they dropped it into the ocean so that the person sunk to the bottom of the ocean and slowly drowned, and from the increasing pressure, it's unclear which killed them first, but like a really horrible way of killing someone. If we think about what makes that so much worse than if they just like painlessly shot them, both are really bad, but what makes that a much worse way of killing them? It's not that it made other people upset. It's not that it if they'd shot them, then the person would have gone on and lived a happy life. The thing that made that so much worse is that it made their death really painful, and extreme pain is bad.
I disagree. I think that that's bad. That's worse because of the psychological toll that it takes on someone who.
Why is psychological toll bad?
Because it manifests as trauma, which renders humans specifically.
Well, this didn't manifest as trauma. The guy died before he had any lasting trauma.
Well, he experienced trauma. The trauma did last throughout and the reason why the baby's example, I have a different opinion on this, is because you sort of stipulated that the babies can't process the trauma, or it can't.
Well, the babies, they don't understand what's going on. They're in great pain.
They're just physical pain. But in this case, you're talking about someone who is being tortured, and they know they're being tortured, and they're aware of the meaning of that, and it's scary.
And why is long-lasting trauma bad? Like, my claim is just that I think
long-lasting trauma is bad because it renders people ineffective to be productive and to help their communities.
Well, I don't think that can be
of the human species.
I don't think that. Well, okay. So in a moment, I'm going to ask you why is rendering, being productive for the human species and so on. Why is that a good thing? Because to be clear, I agree that that's a good thing. I'm pro productivity, anti-trauma, and so on. But my claim is just like
I also agree that pain is bad.
Well, sorry, but just to be clear, I think the way that we figure these things out, is we rely on our intuitions. So the way we figure out that productivity is good is we think about it and it seems good. But I claim if we go by that methodology, then we think about extreme agony, and we're like, okay, it seems bad, and it seems like what makes it bad isn't just that it leaves long-lasting trauma, given the cases I've given involving the baby torture factory, for instance. And so I claim this makes it so that it's reasonable to believe that. But I don't think your answer of, well, trauma is bad because it makes it so that it's harder to advance projects of human flourishing, I don't think that can be correct, because your claim is that even in the anchor case where the person was killed painfully, it's not like, well, if they'd only been shot, they would have carried out productive projects. In both cases, they were about to be killed. The only difference is in one of the cases, their death would be very unpleasant experiences, and the other one, it wouldn't have been. But it's not like, well, if they'd been killed painlessly, then the species would have been advanced or something.
The difference between the baby example and the anchor example is that in the anchor example, they have the ability in the moment to process the meaning of their death, and that psychological trauma, which, as I've stated, I highly value, exists for them in that moment at least. And so that that is,
But
I see that as a different category as.
Yeah, no, right. So I get your point, which is you're saying the reason why it's different in the anchor and the baby cases. In one case, there's psychological trauma, and in the other one, there's not. Now, I ask you, what's bad about psychological trauma? Right? Because I of course agree that it's bad, but my claim is that the way we know that it's bad is we think about what it's like and we think, yeah, that seems bad. But I think we do the same thing.
Not only that, but it adds another layer of pain other than the physical pain in the moment. So,
okay.
So can you agree with me that psychological and physical pain is worse than just physical pain?
Yeah, I agree. Like I'm anti-psychological pain. But I guess I'm trying to figure out why you think psychological pain is bad, but physical pain is not bad. Physical pain is not. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. I should have. I finished the sentence too quickly. That physical pain is only bad insofar as it like detracts from other productive projects or brings about psychological pain. It's only bad instrumentally because it brings about other bad stuff, not for its own sake.
That's not the reason that's not the only reason that it's bad. That is one of the reasons. So if there isn't an inevitability of death, then the psychological pain is way more important. In your examples, there is an inevitability of death. And so I would say both cases, the anchor case and the baby case, should be more or less dismissed. If the death is inevitable and no one else is the wiser, nobody is aware, or there isn't like a knock-on effect of that psychological pain. And do you understand what I mean by that? Like when you're watching someone in agony, that itself, that manifests as like agonistic in yourself and the onlookers, the people who are aware of that. But I want to get to my point on why minimizing psychological suffering for humans is in my head of the is extremely important. Reducing poverty and loneliness in humans fosters societies that can care for all creatures. So let's say to the extent that reducing psychological suffering renders people more productive, more cohesive as a society, and more able to move things forward, move missions forward. Isn't it our moral responsibility? Our moral responsibility to start there, so that if we get society to a better place, then we could help more shrimp. Then we could eliminate poverty in our own species. We'd be able to do a lot more things long term than spend $1 on shrimp right now. Because there are let's say 1 billion people living in extreme poverty and unable to contribute to humanity in any meaningful way.
So first of all, I think it's a good use of money to spend your money saving lives. But I think giving to the Shrimp Welfare Project is like even better. So okay, why I think this? So I it's true that if you spend money on people, then the people can go do productive things, and that's one benefit of it certainly. But we have to think of the margin. So the question is, how much bad stuff are you preventing if you give to the Shrimp Welfare Project, versus how much good stuff is in total being brought about if you give to humans, and then you increase the human productivity so they can do other good stuff. And my claim is that, just the Shrimp Welfare Project is so effective, it prevents such an incredible amount of pain and suffering, that it ends up being a very, very good use of money. Now, it can't be that you think that psychological suffering matters even in cases where it doesn't prevent societal productivity, right? So you think that in the in the anchor case, for example, it's not like if the guy had been given a painless death rather than a painful one, then he would have been more productive in the future. No, he's dead in either case. But nonetheless, you think that that's a big deal. And so long as that's a big deal.
Not necessarily a big deal. It's just a bigger deal than mere physical pain. It adds
So
another
okay,
element of pain.
but I mean, but I think you have to
nonetheless,
I think you have to think in terms of amounts. So the question is, how much physical pain is it versus how much, how much.
well, let's think in amounts. What is the alternative to shrimp being farmed, whether or not they're stunned? What is their alternative in the wild? It's being scooped up by a whale or a much bigger, larger creature. And what
Well,
do you,
but
can you take me what that can you
this
take
is
me
all.
through what that death is like?
Yeah, I
Is
mean,
that
it's not great. Shrimp in the wild probably don't live very nice lives, but that's all irrelevant because it's not like the Shrimp Welfare Project frees the shrimp. That it makes it so that the shrimps get painless deaths rather than excruciatingly painful ones. They're not feeding them to whales instead.
right? But what are the knock-on effects of alleviating shrimp pain on the greater shrimp community?
It doesn't have any knock-on effects on the greater shrimp community.
So what good does it do if they're already going to end up in our stomachs?
Okay, the good that it does is it makes it so that they don't die a painful death.
And I'm asking why that matters. If
Okay,
shrimp don't
I
have
feel
the
like
ability to,
I think we have been over
I
this.
think we
The reason,
differ.
the reason why it matters is that pain and suffering are bad things. And if you can prevent lots of bad things, then you should do that. You should do that even if the preventing bad things doesn't have ripple effects that prevent even more bad things. That's certainly an advantage if they have ripple effects that prevent other bad things. But merely preventing lots of bad things is a good use of money.
Let me ask you this: do you believe that pain shouldn't exist in the world? Physical pain
Like
anywhere.
I think
If you could spend one penny in all of the pain and suffering of all the shrimp before they die, let's say before they die, they're stunned in any scenario, whether it's from a whale or a fishing net.
Oh,
Should
I
no
would
pain
definitely be
exist?
in favor of stunning every shrimp pre-death. Whether I'd be in favor of eliminating all pain and suffering, it would depend on the way that it was eliminated. It would depend on what the alternative is. If the alternative is like everyone is constantly being injured all the time and dying, then it becomes less clear. But if there was something else that filled the role of pain, then I think that would be good. So the devil's in the details. We have been going for about 45 minutes. So maybe we should.
I want to finish on this point, which is if you could flip a switch and say that half the pain in half the species, half the biomass of the world no longer experienced pain, would that be a good or bad thing for the evolution of their respective species?
Well, it depends on how they would be made to no longer feel pain. But right, so pain obviously serves a useful evolutionary function. So if you just eliminated all pain, the default would be then a lot creatures would be a lot more dangerous and reckless. And I think that explains why pain evolved. But the fact that it's good, so pain is in itself bad, but it can cause good stuff. So it can cause creatures to act to survive, for instance. And that's a very good thing. It's good when creatures survive. So given this, if you prevent lots of pain, as long as that doesn't like you could make a similar point about human pain, right? You could say, why prevent human pain? Why give people anesthetic before a surgery? If regardless of whether humans get anesthetic before a surgery, you could say, there's no reason to give humans anesthetic before a surgery because humans, pain is a good thing. It serves as a useful evolutionary signal. That wouldn't be a logical argument because the mere fact that pain as a whole is good doesn't mean that extra pain at the margins is a good thing.
No, and we have the resources to alleviate that pain, and those people are going to live, and so they don't have to live with the psychological trauma of having experienced that pain. Now, for you to say that it's important to eliminate shrimp pain means that you're not necessarily in favor. If you seek to scale this up to the nth degree, then you're circumventing the evolution of shrimp as you would be with any other species. Humans experience psychological pain and physical pain for those very reasons, evolutionary reasons. And so I just don't understand why it seems like a futile effort, doesn't it, to try to take a crack at a sliver of the global shrimp population to alleviate pain when at the end of the day they're going to die anyway. And when other dollars could be diverted to advancing our species, who the smarter, the more effective we are, the more effective we could be towards solving these. Frankly, I feel like it's just a moral cause. It's not rooted in, and I don't think it's a bad cause at all. I'm simply making the argument that I think dollars could be better spent elsewhere. But do you understand where I'm coming from?
Well, I don't agree, and I'll confess I did. I understand what you're saying. I don't think it makes sense, so okay, so why, like, why you ask why care about shrimp if we're only preventing a fraction of the suffering of a fraction of the shrimp? Well, same thing would be true of humans. If you prevent lots of humans from painfully dying, you're only preventing a small fraction of human suffering. What affects, Will McCaskill has a quote, I think, what matters in terms of giving is the size of the drop, not the size of the ocean. If you're trying to figure out how much good an action does, you don't look at the percentage of a species helped. You look at the number of creatures you're helping. And I think it's good to prevent, potentially hundreds of millions of creatures from dying an excruciatingly painful death.
Well, I think that advancing the human race would, in the long term, prevent the painful deaths. If that's what we value morally, advancing the human race would, in the long term, prevent hundreds of billions. It
obviously depends on the amount of that we're advancing the human race. If you save one extra person, it is wildly implausible that. So if you
one extra person has the ability to make $100,000 over the course of their life, and they give 10% of that to the shrimp project, then that's a win for shrimp.
The cost to save a human life is about $5,000. For that same amount of money, you can save about 75 million shrimp. Now, I'm sorry, it's not at all plausible.
You could wait 20 years for that person to have a median income in the U.S. of $50,000 and give $1,000.
Okay, the most effective charities are not saving people in the U.S. They're saving people in other countries. But
okay, well,
the average person in the U.S. whose life is saved does not go on to save 75 million shrimp. Most of them go on to eat lots of shrimp and have a negative effect on shrimp.
I thought we were assuming that people were eating shrimp and they're going to die. Right? They don't live natural deaths.
Yes. Okay. The shrimp. Yes, it is true that the shrimp that are saved by the Shrimp Welfare Project are going to die nonetheless. But it's not true that
ones are going to die sooner than they otherwise would have.
No.
Well, they're targeting the ones that are already being farmed, right?
Yeah, but they're not killing them. They're not going to die sooner than they otherwise would have. They're dying at the same time as they otherwise would have. It's just that their deaths are painless
they otherwise would have been wild shrimp who are going to, one way or another, end up in the mouth of a big sea creature.
What? Why would they have otherwise been wild shrimp? It's not like if they didn't stun them, then the shrimp, they would have allowed the shrimp to go free.
No, I'm saying that those stunners are situated where they're already being farmed, right? And so they are preventing the pain of an inevitable death. Whereas,
yes,
okay, whereas those shrimp would have otherwise been roaming free until they found the mouth of a large creature.
Wait, sorry. Is your view that the way that shrimp come to be farmed is that they take them from the wild and then start farming them?
No, I understand that they figure out way. This is what I
They
think, that they figure out
they
ways
take
to
existing shrimp
where
and
they're
they breed
populated.
them in accordance with demand. So if people didn't eat shrimp, there would just be fewer shrimp. It's not like there would be more wild shrimp. Well, if people didn't eat farm shrimp, that is, then there would be more wild shrimp, of course, because some
So
shrimp are.
even more so than the entire reason that those shrimp exist is so that they are consumed by humans.
Okay, but I don't think that. So if you raise a dog so that you can eat it, and then you torture it for its entire life, and then you eat it, I don't think that's a good thing, particularly if it has a net negative life. So,
No, you shouldn't devote
but
resources
again, this is
towards torturing a dog. No.
um, yeah, well, but I think the primary reason you should not divert resources towards torturing a dog isn't that the resources could be better spent elsewhere, but it's that torturing a dog is really bad and you shouldn't do it.
Of course, I agree with that, but I guess if if you can solve human problems, which would eventually alleviate, hopefully, more and more dog trauma, then you would do that first until we are like
Okay,
way more productive and
the
effective.
claim that you made is that the reason why one of the claims you made is that the reason why we should work on helping humans is that if we help humans, then the humans have greater capacities that they can use to help other animals. Now
Yes.
you have to think that the average human that you save, if you assume you can save humans for $5,000, you have to think that the average child in Bangladesh or whatever will go on to prevent 75 million painful shrimp deaths. That
They
is
could.
not at all plausible.
Why not?
Uh,
Who's to say they don't come to the U.S., get an education here, and we're playing in large numbers here, okay? Like it really
well,
takes
so we
not
can
that much
look.
money to alleviate the
So I
poverty,
mean,
or the.
we can look at. So the Shrimp Welfare Project has about $500,000 in total. So that means that the average person in the world is giving well below 1 penny to the Shrimp Welfare Project, rather than $5,000 to the Shrimp Welfare Project. It's very unlikely that the sorts of people who are saved by the Jens Meyer Foundation are disproportionately likely to give to the Shrimp Welfare Project. Most of the ways in which people affect shrimp are harms that they impose on shrimp by eating them. So if anything, we would expect the
Okay,
effect to be
well,
negative.
what would
I
you
should get
say
going because it is.
if I had an alternative charity that solely targeted poverty in the United States for people
Well,
who
I would
have
say
more
that's even less good. That
people who are
it
more
turns out that
inclined, like whatever your
international aid
community is,
charities.
whatever your community is that is most inclined to eventually help the shrimp. Wouldn't that be
So
a
if
better way?
the idea is like it would help out poor children who are planning on giving to the Shrimp Welfare Project. Uh,
Poor children who otherwise would have been suffering for a long time, rendering them incapacitated as adults. So when you alleviate poverty, you allow people to maintain their health. You allow them to form communities. You allow them to get an education. You allow them to play sports. You allow them to engage in their community and become productive members of society. So if 1 out of every 10 of those children who are lifted out of poverty actually become productive members of their society, and their future dollars will go as far as you say for the shrimp, then you should push off the donations to the shrimp and handle the problem of bringing more productive humans into the
okay, I
fold
feel like I've given
right
my
now.
answer. I don't know, if I can make the point more clearly. The point is, even if there are some degree of ripple effects, that doesn't mean that the ripple effects are enough to outweigh the good done by the Shrimp Welfare Project. The mere fact that if you help out a person, that will help them do other productive things in the future doesn't mean that the total net effect is greater than if you'd given to the Shrimp Welfare Project. And in
Okay.
fact, if you do back of the envelope calculations, it's very implausible that it is more valuable, given that the average person does not help 20 million shrimp. 75 million
Well,
shrimp avoid a painful death.
okay. I see your point, and I do disagree. Like, what do you say we conclude this by just stating, like, where are our disagreements? I think for me, number one is there's a huge gulf between the value you put on shrimp pain and the value I put on shrimp pain. And for me, it's given that they are they're not nearly as complex as humans by orders of magnitude. So would you agree that that's sort of one of the places that we're differing?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. And then,
I mean, I guess
like,
where I think we're differing is I think that shrimp welfare is a very thing worth spending money on, given that you prevent lots of pain and suffering. You disagree for basically three reasons. First, you think that money spent on humans is better because it generates all these ripple effects where if you save a human's life, then they can be allowed and do productive things and the effects go over. My claim is that even if that's right, I mean, first of all, there are other negative ripple effects.
They can help.
Yeah, sure, but even
as well.
Right, but even if there are some ripple effects, that doesn't tell you about the degree of the ripple effect. And it's not like every time you save a life, it compounds and you save 1,000 lives. The ripple effects are, it can certainly, but that's not the average effect. And so my claim is the ripple effect.
If you do it over large quantities, then it just takes 1 out of every 1,000 people who can help 1,000 people to.
But if one out of every 1,000 people who's saved saves 1,000 people, then no one would die after you saved a batch of 1,000 people that would end death.
I'm saying making the world more productive.
Yeah, but right. So I guess right. So my claim is even if there are these ripple effects, the ripple effects are not substantial enough for it to be plausible that a single person whose life is saved does anywhere near as much good as preventing, roughly 75 million painful shrimp deaths. Your other point is you think that just mere physical pain doesn't matter. The reason pain is bad is that it causes long-lasting trauma or that it diminishes productivity. My claim, that's very crazy. If we think about the case where babies or terminally ill babies are painfully dying, I think that's really bad, even if they're terminally ill. And I think the reason that it's bad, even if no one else is upset about it, and you just bit the bullet on that.
It exists in a vacuum. I mean, the stipulations that you put on your hypothetical scenario were that it exists in a vacuum. The baby will never remember it. The baby is inevitably dying, and so there is no downstream impact from that whatsoever. And that is exactly
and my claim is if the baby's in the torture factory in outer space, that's serious. Okay, and then I think the last thing we disagree about is that you think that shrimp pain doesn't matter. Shrimp's interests, we shouldn't take them that seriously because shrimp are non-human and we sort of evolved to care more about humans. And my claim is the mere fact that we evolved to care about some group, that doesn't tell us whether it's justified to care more about some group. So if people evolved to be racist and to care more about members of their own race, that wouldn't tell you anything about whether or not racism is justified. It would just tell you about the evolutionary account of how racism got to be there, not whether it's justified.
Not necessarily. Shrimp don't have the ability to be effective, to affect change if they're alleviated from pain. Humans do. I mean, really, if I have to boil it down to that argument, that's what it is. Alleviating human pain can affect change broadly, whereas it is isolated to each individual shrimp that is, no longer feeling pain than it otherwise would. It doesn't have knock-on effects.
Right. And so I responded to that if we imagine the case where $1 prevents makes the TISIS 3,000 babies before pain seems like a good use of the dollar. You disagreed. I think that's fairly good summary of our disagreement. Where even though that wouldn't produce desirable ripple effects, nonetheless, very good use of money.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time, and I do admire what you're doing and the traction that you've gotten. Like I said, I don't think it's a bad cause at all. I like debating. I'm not, not experienced debater, but I love a good argument, and I think we had a good argument, and definitely on how high you value the pain of of animals that aren't our species, I think that's a huge reason why we disagree on this.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for coming on. Yeah. All right. I guess I'll end the